Hemshech Hayim Beis, Volume 1. We're in the middle of chapter 152, page 299. So let me just give a little wrap-up and summary of where we're at. As you can imagine, since Hayim Beis is one long flowing Hemshech, so it's actually a very complex mosaic, and to really understand any piece, you have to understand all the pieces. However, at the same time, the only way to get there is by building it up piece by piece. But it's always good to keep in mind the general bird's eye view of the whole picture. Which is always critical, because that keeps, as the Chassidus says, when you know the Nakuda of Chachma, the spark of your point of departure, it keeps you honest as you go through all the details. So, for example, the Alter Rebbe, which wasn't common in Sfarim, actually writes on the Sharblat, on the cover page of Tanya, what the purpose of the whole Sefer is, in one line. Karev elecha davar ma'ed, to explain well the pasuk Karev elecha davar ma'ed, eichu karev ma'ed, b'ficha b'vav chalasesei, b'derech arucha k'tzara, b'ezrus Hashem yizbarach. So other Svarim, you have to learn through them, and sometimes even when you get to the end, you're not always sure what was the punchline, so to speak. So Hayim Beis, this is of course my own speculation, and I say it with all the proper qualifications, is essentially the interface. It's an elaborate, and maybe the most elaborate of all Hasidic, and I would say mystical discourses. Nothing has ever been written so in such length by a Rebbe, and gathering together all of Chassidus, which is really all of Kabbalah, in establishing and understanding how we humans in this earth interface and connect and have a relationship with the divine, with God. The questions are obvious. These two are completely antithetical. One is a creator, one is a creature. And there's so many quandaries, philosophical and psychological, to deal with this. But this is the essence of all of Chassidus and all of Kabbalah. You can say Achdus Hashem, which is how we connect, how we unite. And this is a world of diversity. God is one. God is beyond one. So without going into all the complexities of the question, piece by piece, Hayim Beis establishes this, obviously citing the Maimorim that came before the Rebbe Rashab and the Sfarim that came before Chassidus, especially the Arizal and the Kisvei Arizal, Zohar, and so on. But he gathers it all together. And the bottom line is that it's not just a philosophical quandary, not just a philosophical question. We're dealing here with a practical one also. It's about giving us a blueprint, a guide of how to live our lives. And I say it very clearly because every time you immerse in it, you could see how lofty it is, and it takes you completely to another place. And it's very hard to see how you ground it and bring it back to our own personal lives. But that's the critical component. If you don't do that, then the whole point is missed. So yes, we need to know what it says in the operator's manual, but then the key is to bring that operator's manual back to our lives. And that's what we try to do here. So in that context, interface, the Rebbe Rashab, all these, so far we're up to page, basically 300 pages almost, into the Hemshech. 152 chapters, has been establishing slowly the whole structure of existence. And briefly, it consists of what we call the Er HaGvul, you can call it immanent energy, that's commensurate with and tailored to existence. We always have to use as a grounding element our own personal selves. From our flesh we behold God. That is human faculties, where every faculty has a resting place, has a container and an energy. An eye has the power of vision, it rests in your eye, perfectly tailored to each other. The ears, the heart, the brain, and so on. Then there is transcendent energy, and that's used, the Ratzon, Keser. That is the example in our Keiches, it's Ratzon, desire. The will, the desire to do something. It doesn't have a particular location, but it has a direct impact. And without it, nothing works. If you have no desire to do something, you can have all your faculties functioning 100% and nothing happens. The same thing, God created the universe this way in order to give us an understanding of Himself. Now obviously we always have to start with a qualification. God is not made of any of these elements, does not need any of these elements. But without them, there's no relationship between us and God. Then the whole thing wouldn't make sense. And we would just be, this is the way it is. There would be nothing for us to be able to do to get there. And because we were created with minds and hearts, you have to say that we think and feel, because God wants us to think and feel, because in some way that's how God manifests himself, in thoughts and feelings. And that's why the way we function is just a reflection of how the divine manifests in these functions. I keep saying manifest because obviously when we talk about Atzmus is beyond it all. But that beyond it all wants this. So the same beyond is invested in the structure as we know it, so the structure is infused with all that beyond. So it's not just, okay, God wanted something, it has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with him. Atzmus invested and immersed himself in this structure that we deal with. At the same time, obviously he remains above it. And that too is part of the relationship. That too we have to experience. We have to experience both a closeness with God, which is Avos Hashem, and we have to experience a distance from God, which is Yiras Hashem, awe. And not distance in a way to separate us, and distant as in, oh, he's not here. No, distant as in respect of a reality that is beyond our own. And this too is part of the quandary. How do those two balance? How are you close to something and at the same time know that it's completely beyond you? So this is really the question. In different words you can say is, how does the Er HaBli meet the Er HaGvul? How does the transcendent meet the immanent? There's no quick answer to this question because it's all these Maimarim. But briefly, some key points is that there is number one, in the immanent there's an element that touches the transcendent. In other words, in Gvul you can experience Bli Gvul, and in Bli Gvul you can experience Gvul. So, for example, God's desire, this infinite possibilities of an artist that can create art in infinite ways, chose to create it in a certain way which we call the 10 spheres. These 10 spheres are 10 emanations that are divine attributes, not reflecting God's essence or core, but God manifests in these attributes. So the infinite energy of God, Ein Sof, chose to define himself in a Er HaGvul, which is called the 10 hidden spheres. And not just the Kalim, not just the structure of existence, but also energy. Also the divine aspect in it, which is divine energy, also has in the 10 spheres. It's one of the key chidushim, one of the key contributions. I can't say it's a contribution of Ayin Beis per se, because this opinion already exists. But this whole Hemshech, this whole series, goes according to this opinion, that also in the energy there's a structure, which adds a component of unity that doesn't exist if the energy has no structure, because then there remains something that's separate. And then the other way around, from the Kalim perspective, from the perspective of structure can find a way to reconnect to beyond structure. You know why? Because God, which is beyond Bli Gvul and beyond Gvul, implanted these seeds in each of them. So when you climb the ladder step by step, through refining our personal lives, step by step, on our terms, we can ultimately reach a place that is Bli Gvul, and then climb further. So it's not you reach a ceiling and say, oh, the finite has reached its finite capabilities and that's it, you can't go any further. You could go further, because there's a point where they meet. And this, of course, is a major part of the detective work, the treasure hunt in Ayin Beis, is finding that point. Where does the infinite meet the finite? Where heaven meets earth? The answer is going to be that they meet each other at many different places, but ultimately it's really where the 10 spheres meet Keser, in a way. Because if Keser, Ratzon, represents Ein Sof, Bli Gvul, and the 10 spheres represent Gvul, so where does Chachma meet Keser? That's going to be the big question. And he's already gone into that discussion. Not completely, we're just really beginning to go there. But in a way, this is the difference between the Avos and Matan Torah. The patriarchs, the Avos, represent a key element in history, which is really the whole Chumash Bereshis, where they laid the groundwork, they pioneered the way that would set the stage for the Jewish people to receive the Torah at Matan Torah. So Torah was not given at the point of creation. Point of creation began, as he explained, the world was the Shechina b'tachtenim haisa. The Shechina was a perfect world, but it had plenty of potential for imperfection, and that's exactly what happened with the tree of knowledge, Chet Eitzadas, and then the further descents and concealments, and Avram Avinu began to reverse it and realign the universe with its plan. Realign the machine that it should work according to the way the operator's manual dictates. And the Avos, their main role was, as he explains, was to align the Er HaGvul properly. Because you can't get to Ir HaBli if you don't have your machine working. It's like someone saying, I want to reach transcendence when you have flaws in your imminent state. First you have to get healthy before you're ready to absorb and receive a greater energy, which would be Matan Torah, Ir Chadash. So where we are now is essentially a long discussion of what the Ovis really accomplished, leading us to understand what Matan Torah accomplished. And when you read it, it seems pretty great if you can achieve what the Ovis achieved. It's a pretty good world as it is. And yet that's still not enough, because Atzmos obviously is beyond that. And the goal is to climb all the way to the ultimate. So to bring it back to specifically the chapters we're at, so he began discussing it by saying that there's a major difference. Explains it in the context of Meichen and Midas. Began with a Kabbalistic expression that says there's two types of Yichudim. There's a Yichud that maintains existence, and there's a Yichud, a unification that introduces new energy into existence. That would be the equivalent again in our personal lives, a healthy life, and when something new is infused, that's even beyond health. So healthy life is a person's, God forbid, not so well, you have to make sure they're healthy. A new energy is when something new that wasn't there before it enters. In Kabbalistic terminology, the first is called Yichud, what he called Yichud Abba Ve'ima Tatoyim. That's the Yichud of Chachma Bina, the lower Chachma Bina, or otherwise known as the Yichud of Yisrael, Saba, and Tfuna. So Yisrael Saba is basically Abba Tata, and Tfuna is Bina Tata, the lower Bina. And the higher Yichud of Matan Torah, the Chidush, is called Yichud Abba Ve'ima Elohim. Higher Chachma and higher Bina. Pnimis HaChachma, Pnimis HaBina. To understand that well, we went into a whole discussion of the distinction between them. I mean, obviously I'm not going to go over all that, there's a time I'm about it. But led us into a whole discussion on the difference between Atzilus and Biyah, and how Atzilus transmits for its own health, so to speak, for its own function, and how it transmits to a lower level. The equivalent would be a teacher who communicates to students at his own level, which is the world of Elikus, a divine world of Atzilus, right? It communicates to a completely different paradigm of student. That would be Biyah. Okay. Now, in that he said that there's two types of Ilav, there are two types of cause and effect. One cause and effect that's of the same personality, that the effect is of the same personality as the cause, like a branch of a tree, is the example he uses. Another is where the effect and cause are not of the same personality, but they're still cause and effect. They still have a relationship with each other. And the example he used for that is Meichen and Midas, how the mind impacts emotions, feelings. The example for the same effect would be how a teacher conveys intelligence to students. So that's all in the world of intelligence. So the effect, even a student who may be far distant from the teacher, is still receiving something we call seichel. Midas, on the other hand, are influenced and are born out of a contemplation, but they're not contemplation. They're feelings. They're subjective. Like he says, hergish atzmi, you feel yourself, and what's in it for you, so to speak. And two, midas are hispilus. They're excitable. They have excitement, and there's a stimulation involved. So there's also an intellectual stimulation where we get excited intellectually, but that's still not about you personally getting excited. That's still in the domain of seichel. And he explains at length in chapter 150 the different types of contemplation that all lead to different conclusions in emotions and feelings to the divine. Now, briefly, 4 different dimensions he spoke about. I'll just say them quickly and then move where we are, closer to where we are. The 4 were basically going from the bottom up, and he used the tefillah as in davening. We go through this contemplation. Well, the first is just the contemplation on the matter being born out of energy. Yesh ma'ayin. The idea of creation. The idea that the material world has no substance and reality of its own, in order to understand, and because it's finite, it cannot create itself, and requires a higher force of energy, what he calls ayin eliki. That is bonus, he says, especially when you get into the details of how the different worlds came out of this ayin, leads us to not to a particular emotion, but to a general wanting to, a craving, a longing to be connected to this.
Be close.
Yeah. Right. The second was when you think about how that energy is inside of us, how it gives us life, how it sustains us all the time. And without it, we would not exist. So just as we have a love and a longing for life itself, the guf knows that the soul gives it power for energy, and especially when we're weak or feeble or debilitated, we long for this energy, which is basic energy to long for life. You want to be alive and you want to be healthy. Same thing when you contemplate that the divine energy is giving life to all of existence. It also leads us to a longing to want this. This already leads to ava. This is a love, because this is directly your longing for life, and it's a direct connection. It's not just in general. The third contemplation, he says, is understanding that all the energy that enters our existence is nothing compared to Atzmus, the source. It's only Baruch Sha'amar, like one utterance. So that brings us to a sense of, a deeper sense of love, of something that's completely beyond us. And you want to cling to that. Not just to the divine that's inside of you, the immanent, in other words, also to the transcendent. And the final fourth one is when you contemplate what is Atzmus like. The Reimamus, and the wonder and grandeur of a divine reality, completely beyond us. He says, and that brings us to Yireh Allah, a sense of true awe. You can learn in Kufnun. It's a very fundamental chapter if you want to know what his badnus is and what to think about during davening, etc. And then he goes on and says, and all this is still not real seichel, because it's all his badnus that leads to midas. That's chapter Kufnun Aleph. Because midas is the awakening of the feelings, the experience. It's not pure intellect. The pure contemplation, or as he puts it, Hasag is even higher than his badnus, is beyond application. It's beyond application, and it's beyond personal experience. So when you really want to understand Yichud Abba V'Ima Allah and Yichud Abba V'Ima Tatayin, he doesn't say those words here, but it's clear that the Yichud Abba V'Ima Tatayin, Yisrael Saba V'Tfuna, is how it applies to Midas, to application. The real Yichud to connect to that place, that's pure content, the pure concept, that's beyond experience. Now, of course, the goal is to join the two, because we don't want to just be in an abstract place. You want that abstraction to come down. But on the other hand, if you want to have the pure divine experience, it's when you're completely absorbed in the contemplation and it's not even affecting you yet. And the goal, of course, is to bring these two together. And we're going to lead to, obviously, is that the Ovis focus on the first that I just said, how the Hizbandnus brings into application into the immanent world. And that will lead us to a place of transcendence where you can go into Meichin beyond existence.
This Meichin beyond existence is not leading to Midas at all? Is not connected?
Ultimately it does lead, but it does at the time when you're completely there, you're detached from anything. Look, in the true picture, it's almost like it's the paradox that we always need. It's when you're primistic involved in what you should be involved. When you're within, then when you go out, you'll be empowered to do what you have to do. When people, like what the Rebbe Rashab said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, he said, better to be outside and look inside than be inside and look outside. When a person is completely absorbed in learning, it should so absorb them, they shouldn't be feeling even their own feelings. On the other hand, like the Kel Yelad Beicha story, you have to hear the cry of a child. On the other hand, that doesn't mean a selfish absorption. If you really did it right with the right bittul, then when the time comes and you leave yeshiva, now you have to really go out and you do that properly. The problem is that when you're inside, you're thinking about outside, and when you're outside, you're thinking about inside. So you really need both. Moichin in its purest form, as you said, is total solitude. Total absorption. You're so involved, you're not even thinking that you're thinking. It's like when you read something, you don't even realize that's words on a page. You just turn it, you don't even realize that you're so absorbed. It's like it transports you to another time and place. That's the way the experience is supposed to be. Then comes the step 2, dira v'tachtenim. You have to bring it into downward. But we still have to recognize both elements. Remember, the interface, you need to have an experience of the divine that's not diluted or in any way shaped by our experiences. And then, at the same time, you want that to become channeled into who we are. That's the challenge. How do you maintain your individuality while you connect to God? You could either, we all simply understand, okay, I annihilate myself, I get absorbed in God, godliness. Or, I'm myself and I only have a limited version of God. That's the two options. Chassidus goes all the way, does not want that. So the question is how? The answer is that mitzad atzmus it's possible. But how is it from us possible? It's possible because if we climb the ladder step by step by step, and we expand our containers, God will allow us to bring in Bli Gvul into the containers. It's like, go back to the classic example of the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is the teacher completely concealing his intelligence so a student can emerge. Tzimtzum Arish, complete black hole. Not one speck. Then once you have the Kalim, and the child is born, now the child can start learning Aleph Beis, Mishnah, Gemara, and one day the student can become as great as the teacher, and even greater than the teacher. And not a miracle, is because the Kalim expanded, and they have in them. Remember, since they all come from Atzma, so even the Kalim, even the little Gvul, has in it somewhere the potential to meet Bli Gvul. But you can't do it. We're not talking about on God's terms. We're talking on our terms, and on our terms, it has to come through our baby steps. You can't miss a step. That's why you can't miss a switch. It's like literally when you see programming or any type of engineering, one switch missing in millions, and it's not going to work. Somewhere it's going to give. In our case, it has to come into every aspect. So Midas brings it into our experience. Meichin gives us a taste of something beyond your experience. Just imagine, what would we be like if we were just Bali Midas? We would be animals. We'd be driven by impulse and emotion, and there'd be no capacity to imagine, to dream, to transcend ourselves, to think what someone else is saying that we disagree with. The ability to go beyond yourself and go with your mind to places that your natural emotions, as we said, by default, our natural emotions gravitate toward materialism. How do we have the power to stop that? By sitting down and contemplating and saying, you know what? I'm going to challenge that. I'm going to sit down in the morning, instead of just indulging in food or survival or whatever it is that our emotions lead us to. I'm going to sit down and contemplate on God, on the divine that brought us here. The contemplations I just mentioned before. And then, but we still have to have the distinction between Midas and Meichin. So that was chapter 151 primarily. But now going back to as I said, Meichin and Midas, but Meichin and Midas in more subtle form is really Chachma and Bina. Let me qualify by saying, not that Bina is Midas, but Bina is more Yesh than the Ayin of Chachma. Meichin, real Meichin, the purest of Meichin, in Meichin itself, is Chachma. So he takes us now back to Chachma. So after we understand the general picture, Midas in general is the Yesh. What do I mean by Yesh? We mean self. What do I feel? If you don't say the word I in the word in the sentence, it's not emotions. An emotion means I like it, I don't like it, I love it, I don't love it, I'm repelled, chesed, gvura. There's no emotion possible without an I. Also, emotions also relate to another. You can't actualize an emotion unless you have someone else. Meichin, there's no necessity for an I. Someone says I understand or I don't understand, that's already you're bringing your personal in. That's not the issue. In intelligence, it should be the idea is clear. You're absorbed by the idea. It's not about me liking it or not liking it. Obviously, I understand is important that you've integrated, you've understood it, and you can say I don't understand yet. I don't mean in that way. But I mean true intelligence is not about an experience or a feeling or an application. It's about the idea. Whatever the idea dictates, that's what it is, whether you like it or not. That's a true intelligent, objective intelligent subject concept. So in Meichin itself, he says it's Chachma and Bina, which is going to lead us back to Yichud Abba V'Imelon and Tata. So Chitzeni is Chachma and Bina, as we said, that is more related to the Midas. As we spoke, there's Midas Sheba Meichin of Chachma, that's Yisrael Saba. That's how the mind begins to apply, like an inclination. You're thinking of an idea, but the idea is inclining towards Chesed or toward Gvura, towards Chus, not towards your personal feeling, but that this idea is leading towards this person merits or doesn't merit. Like a judge, after a long pilpul, a long deliberation on different arguments, is starting to lean this way or that way. The Tfuna is the Midas Sheba Bina, because in Chachmeh, like he says, Shasik Rav, that could still be beyond pure logic. You sense that this is right, but you can't really explain it. In Bina, you can actually explain your inclination. But Yichud Abba V'Imay alone is far higher. There we're talking Moichin as devoid, detached from Midas. He spoke at length about Primis HaChachma, Primis HaBina. That's already the Hanocha. That's the resonance of the truth of an idea. Is the Nekudas HaTamtzis and Bina, that you come to the conclusion and you also sense of resonance. I mean, there's a distinction between Primis HaChachma and Primis HaBina, as I discussed earlier, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Now, so Chachma and Bina, the key elements that we're going to. So Chachma and Bina, Chachma is primarily, is like the Atzilus of Atzilus is Chachma. Bina and Atzilus is Bria Shabbat Atzilus. And Zoh of Atzilus is Yitzira. Yitzira of Atzilus rather is Midas, is of Atzilus or Zoh. And Malchus of Atzilus will be Asiyah of Atzilus. Now that we've established that, in chapter 152, where we're in the middle of, the Rebbe Rashab went into a discussion of the Chakrim, which, by the way, I did research now, and I can give you some more information. Just a moment. You want to give me some water? Please. Thank you. Okay. So, in the previous chapter, he concluded by saying that there's midas hashayachim le'elmas and there's midas atzmim that are not shaykh to the world. The midas shayachim le'elmas is, of course, as we've been discussing, the midas as they relate to a zulas, to another. The midas atzmim are the way they are, the way they reside in the mind. Midas shebeseichel, as he said, which is not necessarily pnimius hachachma. That's more, as we said, chetzenis chachma bina. That's what he said, midas atzm. To explain that, in chapter 152, the Rebbe Rashab went into the discussion about what it says the chakrim. The chakrim here happen to be, actually, I think I negated it last time, is the Meir Nevuchim and the Kuzri. This is taken from a maimer from the Tzemach Tzedek called the Drush Gimel Shittis. It's a famous maimer from the Tzemach Tzedek. He talks about the three opinions about Eir, about Sfiris, that we've been discussing. Shittis.
You said that.
I said that? Yeah. I didn't know it was directly taken. I know it was connected to it. But there he says, he's talking about the Kuzri and the Meir Nevuchim, who basically make the statement that you can't apply same midas above. And if you look there, it elaborates. And there's also a maimer from the Rebbe Rashab, earlier maimer, Vayidaber, Shvuas maimer, Vayidaber, it's called Dvarim Me'ela, Tofresh Samak Daled. It's also discussed at length. So this little section here, at length there, you really get the bigger picture. Basically, their argument is, what's emotions? Emotions, feelings, is number one, we get excited about something. It means we're lacking something, and this excites us. You're feeling weak, so you feel compassionate. You're missing something. And he uses that example. Can you apply such midas above? God is not in lack. Doesn't get excited about things. He's not in a need, an emotional need of anything. I don't see it specifically, but obviously it's not exactly the same thing with God understanding something. God can understand. Doesn't mean he needs to understand, but understanding is not quite problematic. A midas seems to be a subjective type of need, and based on weakness, and based on lacking something.
When you say understanding, you mean knowing.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. They don't have a problem with saying moichin l'mayla. In other words, as a matter of fact, the Rambam says hu amadu hu yideya. So they say there's no midas l'mayla. So the Rebbe Rashab makes it very clear that what they're saying is true on one end and not true on another. He says clearly emes and eina emes. So he disagrees. That Tzemach Tzedek actually says that even though they were Gedel Yisrael, but that's not the shita, the derech of Kabbalah. That's the Tzemach Tzedek's language that I just mentioned. He says clearly, Av Shem Gedel Yisrael, but it was not the derech of Kabbalah. So what's the derech of Kabbalah? The Kuzri and Meir Nevuchim were not. They were not Mekubalim.
The Rambam is known to be Mekubalim.
First of all, there are two opinions. And even the opinion that says that he was the end of the days, that not as a makubal, that he knew a little Kabbalah. It's not correct what you're saying. Many hold that there's no hints of Kabbalah in anything he writes. There's one place that Agad Shava brings, the Rebbe brings about it. There's two opinions. Clearly there's those that say he did not know Kabbalah. And it's most likely that, at least in the obvious way, he didn't. And here clearly, Tzemach Tzedek writes this clearly, that even though Gedel Yisrael, but it was not the derech of Kabbalah. Look, almost all things that Chassidus Kabbalah pass in one way, it's usually against the Rambam. Like, let's say, Elam Haba. Moved?
So everything was seichel with it?
No, it's like anything. Shammai Hillel, their approach was based on Chikira Lakus. I mean, seichel. Is it Teira seichel? Anoich Hashem Elokech, is that seichel? Kabbalah is additional. Kabbalah is not just. Kabbalah is a whole yidiyah. It's a whole knowledge of the Seder Shtalshlus and so on. Anyway, so they say that. So Rebbe Rashab says, on one hand, what they're saying is correct. You can't say the spilus of midas above, but to say there's no midas lamaila, you also cannot say, because we know here he just says yesh lamaila midas achesed midas agvura. The Tzemach Tzedek goes even further and says there's esses sfiras. The Sefer Yitzhak says esses sfiras blima. It's not sfiras only lefi ha'pu'ula, because they're saying basically anywhere it says expression of God as an emotional expression, it's God's the action of chesed. So when he's doing it, it's an action of chesed. He actually brings it lefi ma'aseh ani nikra.
Tool chest, right?
Huh?
It's like a tool chest.
Yeah, he does this, he does that, but you can't attribute it to his to so-called a divine personality, midas. And according to Kabbalah, Chassidus, you absolutely can. I will just say one thing that Tzemach Tzedek does say. Maybe you can reconcile by saying that Rabbi Yehuda Levi, Kuzri, and Rabbi Nevuchim are speaking about Atzmus that's higher than Atzilus, because there you can attribute. But you can't say that there's Bechal no Midas.
Do they
divine Midas?
Not only his Spilus, also Midas?
That's what they say. I'm telling you what he says here. He says that in one part they say there's no Midas Lamaila, and that is not correct. There is the Midas Lamaila. You could say, as I just said, Lifnei Tzimtzum, you could say there's no Midas. He says that, Tzemach Tzedek says. I mentioned that here too.
So there's no seichel also?
Fine. Right? No problem. In Chanami.
Are they saying...
That's the Maral. That's the Maral's disagreement with the Rambam. The Rambam says, Hu Amadu, Hu Yidei Yidu. And the Maral says, how could you attribute das to the Eibishter? And Chassidus is the same reconciliation. Chassidus says, L'mayla from the Tzimtzum, or L'mayla of Atzilus, there's no das, because, like Lav Inun Midusi Hu Klal, there's an expression. Or less Machshavet Tfeis Be Klal, and so on. And then there's when God manifests in Atzilus and so on, there it does have Hu Amadu, Hu Yidei, Hu Yidua. It's exactly the answer. So bottom line is, so in that sense they're not. Now why is it so relevant to our discussion here? So he says like this, that Adarab, let me just continue. Adarab, what the Rambam and the Kuzri say, besides being incorrect because it says clearly there's a midas hachesed, midas hagvura, he says Adarab, and this midas hachesed is always bisgalus. It's not just when they're activating a pu'ula. There's always that midas always there. Why? Because midas lamaila are not based on an awakening. You see something, so suddenly you're attracted to it. You can't say that by God. By God, there's always a midas hachesed. Because he chose, mitzat shleimas atzmas, as he puts it, he chose to have such an attribute. So there's an attribute called chesed.
Almost said that Bizgalus could be that it's there, but it's like...
Bizgalus, he means not to us necessarily. It means Bizgalus that Gam kishenim peilim pulas hachesed. Bizgalus means that it's like an entity that's always there. There's always chesed of Atzilus reigning. It's like inside of us. There's always a chesed, even if it's not peil. That's what he means. It's an entity like that. This is crucial to the interface, because according to the Rambam and the Kuzr, if you want to put it bluntly, there's no connection between us and Atzmus. There's no way. It cuts off. Because there's no midas up there. So where do we go? What happens to our structure? Like I said, this is where Kabbalah and Chassidus, as I mentioned, that you cannot find Al Pi Nigla, and Al Pi Chkira, and Al Pi Musar. You can't find it because they don't go into an understanding of how the divine and the human can join without annihilating us. So if we were created B'Tselem Elokim, their answer would be is the only way you connect to God is by really negating your individual personality. You just subjugate yourself more or less like a subject to a master. And Avos Hashem and Yedias Hashem has its limit. And this is not, you've never heard this before. This is fundamental Chassidus. There's also the other way around. Chassidus does other things. Chassidus also lifts God Atzmus to far higher than the Rambam, the Kuzari, and all of them also. So it goes both ways. So the higher he is, actually, the more you can integrate. Because the Sof Kosof, it sounds like that. If God cannot manifest in Seichel and Midas, that also is a limitation. That means that your God is bound by not being connecting. But their justification is a legitimate one, because they're basically saying the finite world is inferior, and God doesn't have inferior qualities. So we also agree the inferior part of existence God doesn't have. But the structure, where did it come from? I mean, this is critical to the whole discussion of the interface, obviously.
According to the Rambam, Kuzari, didn't we say earlier that the ultimate Yichudi law is just an intellectual one that does not read us? It's just a comprehension for itself. No fools.
That was only half a sentence. It's only half a sentence you heard. I said that if you're not inside when you should be inside, you won't be outside when you should be outside. Remember that part?
Yeah.
Which means it would be like saying a bacher in yeshiva should be thinking about Mitzrayim while he's in the middle of learning a Maimer or middle of learning halacha, or Gemara. When you're immersed, that's what you should be doing. Immersed in the Torah you're learning. Just like davening, you're doing davening for davening. Then, you do that right, then when the time comes and the next step is to go out, you'll bring the whole Torah with you outward. So there's a stage where you need to be completely absorbed in Meichen, and there you're going to have the purest experience of the divine, because it's detached from the application. But then you want to bring that full experience into application. So you need both. That's the key. It's the key to everything. It's like total immersion allows you then to transmit it properly. The people who can explain ideas best to the simplest children are the ones that have been immersed in it so deeply and they were not distracted and thinking about the children when they were immersed. So they completely absorbed it, then they can explain it properly.
They weren't processing it well.
Correct. I mean, it's a rule almost in anything. If you don't research properly the ideas and you're thinking about application before you should be, your applications will be dubious, I would say, full of mistakes. If you research it properly and you give it time and you absorbed it and you went back and forth without any leanings this way or that way, far more assured that you're going to come to the right conclusions because you were thorough. So Meichen has the mila that allows you to absorb completely. You're in the experience, and then when you come to apply, which is necessary too. Like he made it very clear. The Kavanah, he says, he even said in the parentheses, it would be like when you're in the air, you should be in the air. Don't be thinking about anything else. Then when you come to the Kalim, it'll be, in full integrity of the original. Follow?
How do we know that the Kuzri and Men Nevuchim were wrong? In other words, is it just because it's Kabbalah says so, or it's like logical?
The Rebbe brings about this with God, it's a Tzimtzum Kipshute and other opinions the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, in Perek Zayin, Shayrich HaGamunah. He says, not like those that held Shaga That's Perek Beis. That's Perek Aleph. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, he doesn't use the word Deis HaKesu because he's talking about Gedalim. Perek Zayin. No. Shashagu b'Havanosim there with the Arizal. Anyway, so the Rebbe brings that all these type of things always begins first that there was a Kabbalah the Alter Rebbe received so, and then he explained it. Because obviously if you receive a different Kabbalah, you can explain it in a different way. So is it purely logic? Look, God is not bound by logic, but He created logic. So obviously logic has a big thing to say about things. But it has also an element of knowing what the Kabbalah is, what was told to us. So I would say the Kabbalah, what Kabbalah says, like we say about the Hamachlekes of the Rambam and the Ramban, about Chiyas HaMesim. What's the lashon? What? Yeah, Shashagu V'Tov. Yeah, that's right. What you just said is from Perek Aleph. Perek Beis, rather. Perek Beis. Yeah. But when you said Chezev, you said the word Chezev. Because there's a whole sikh from the Rebbe, Shabbos Chazain, where he made this distinction. So I'm very, very clear about that's not the same lashon.
He's not talking about the Rambam Kuzi.
This is the Mishnah Chassidim Yeshua Levov. These are great gedalim. Tamid Arizal, Guri Arizal. The Rambam doesn't speak about Tzimtzum, so this is not the Rambam. Look, the Ravid writes on the Rambam, the famous Hasoga, where the Rambam says you can't say God has a guf v'lei gvia. So the Ravid writes sharply. He says Gdelim Imenu did hold that one. Gdelim from the Rambam. So it's not Ogifrek that someone, and the Ravid did have a more knowledge of Kabbalah than the Rambam did. That's clear. You could see it in certain places. So the Rebbe is Metavich and Chassidus is Metavich. The Rambam is speaking in a certain level. But if you go to the Atzmus, obviously God could also relate to a guf. That's why there is such a shita. But what Kabbalah is that there's no guf, and that's how we explain it. The same thing is here. Because Kabbalah says it, it's hard to say. It goes hand in hand. Kabbalah says it because it's emes. It's emes, and that's why it's more logical. It does make more sense. Initially, the Rambam's argument is far greater, just like with the Rambam, the same shita. The shitasa, you could even say. The Rambam holds that ultimate schar is Gan Eden, the shamas without bodies. Ayat Chiyas HaMesim, that's a stage. We'll go through to give the reward for the body, but that's a temporary stage. Ultimate reward. And his explanation is simple. Only the neshama can reach such heights of asog and godliness that the body can never reach. So it makes much more sense, spiritual. That's initially. The Ramban disagrees. Chassidus Paskins, it says clearly that some Chassidus brings the Alter Rebbe Rabbeinu Gadol Posak Ramban, and the Rebbe says clearly that the Psak in Kabbalah Chassidus is not like the Rambam. That the ultimate schar is guf. The Rambam's question. The answer is the Rambam is speaking more in the logical sense. Spirituality is superior to material. But if you go higher, then Atmos Kashem Sheyesh Lekeche Bebiltei V'Agul Kach Yesh Lekeche Begvul, and that the guf was also created by God. Why limiting him? But this requires a Kabbalistic Chassidic approach. Because if you go purely by Chkira, by human logic, it makes more sense that the spiritual is far greater. It's also a different shit in how you live your life. The Dira B'Tachtenim aspect. Is Dira B'Tachtenim just simply because you have to do something because God wants you to do mitzvahs and gashmis? Or is that the ultimate kavanah? Many will say the ultimate kavanah is learn Torah and do mitzvahs. But he wants you also to have minig b'derech cheretz, so hanig b'minig b'derech cheretz, so we do a little of that. But the goal is that all this is a pruzder to go to Elam Haba. Ask the most average Orthodox Jew. Why are you here? In order to build reward for the next world. That's most people will say. You do that through Torah and mitzvahs, and there's the tests and temptations in order to challenge us. But the reason of Dira B'Tachtenim, that's the ultimate purpose, is not the conventional approach to most people's minds. And it also nafkamina and how we immerse ourselves. Even the concept of shlichus would not exist if the first approach was correct. Then why are we going to shlichus? Do the minimal in Olam Hazeh you have to do, and learn Torah the rest of the day. You need some business, do some work to make parnasa. But why are you spending your whole day going and helping and changing the world? Since when is that? Some will say Tikkun Olam is a modern secular invention. It says that's the word. Through the mitzvahs, you're misakin it, like through the air, you're misakin the kelim. So this has real implications of real different philosophies. But subtly, this is also connected to what we're saying here. Whether you attribute to the divine the structures of existence, or don't you? So, like I said, at the end of the day, the Rambam and the Kuzi are not wrong, because you could always say they're talking about a Lakuz that's removed from existence is higher than it all. On the other hand, by them Ruchnis is far more superior than Gashmis. So I think you need the Rambam and the Kuzi. It's not like we're not negating them that there's nothing they say that has merit. Adarab, it helps us understand the Kabbalah and Chassidus, because their approach is correct to say Lav inu midas klal. Yes, it's true. It's good to say that. But then there's a whole other, that's why he said in one aspect they're emes, in one aspect it's not emes. It depends what you're speaking about. At the end of the day, when you learn Chassidus Kabbalah properly, it actually elevates the Rambam and everybody to a higher level. Because it's, each one is talking about their madreg. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day.
It's like the Maharal said.
The Rambam writes in Sefer Hayad that Shedim and all this is mamish tusim. Right? He dismisses it with the ganzen trask. Huh?
The whole thing.
Yeah. Mamish like superstition. Never even give it any credence.
And the Gemara is full of it.
One second. Gemara is full of it. You know, with stories of Baal Shem Tov. And you have...
Yes, the Friedrich.
Right. So, one second. So listen to this. So the Rebbe in Tavshem Mem Dalet spoke about it. And he said, in the middle of Fabringen, he said, Ukiyadua, or something like that. I remember Kiyadua, he said something that's known. Or that after the Rambam, there were no more Shedim. That's what he says. In this battle given by the Zman HaRambam. One second. That's what the Rebbe said. So I remember it clicked to me. So I right away wrote to the Rebbe, what's that? What is the Rebbe saying? In other words, that's how he's being metavach. That the Rambam basically is talking from here on, In other words, it doesn't exist. Is that because L'cheira, there's a full of svarim that it says it, and also the stories of the Baal Shem Tov that is afterwards. So, and I also asked that, and I'll tell you in a second, the second thing I added, the Rebbe didn't answer on that one. I wish he would have. So the Rebbe wrote, Lafusha Machlekes, so you do as much as possible to minimize the Machlekes, so yes, that's what he was doing. In other words, it still remains a problem, because the Rambam does say it doesn't exist, and we have the Baal Shem Tov, but at least it could say that it stopped existing in the time of the Rambam. It makes the Machlekes less. Because it means that Rambam has no problem that in the time of Talmud it existed, but now it doesn't exist. That's what the Rebbe wrote.
How are you explaining that it does exist to some extent afterwards?
No, afterwards no. Afterwards you still have a machlekes, but at least there's no machlekes. If the Rambam is completely shell, then you have to deal with all the Gemaras and all those that said that. At least here, so the question is whether it continues, like whether the Nevuah continued. It's a legitimate, it's interesting chiddush of the Rebbe. I never, only the Rebbe said it. No one ever said such a thing. And then I wrote that I heard the Rebbe that I heard that before the Nesias, the Rebbe once said in the Fabringen that the Rambam was the world of Chochmah. And the world of Chochmah, you speak like Chochmah. Just like Shammai speaks Gvura and Hillel's Chesed, the Rambam was Chochmah. The world of Chochmah, Shedim don't exist. And that's why Bechal, like the same thing, Tchis HaMesim. Not that he's not like the Rambam says about, the Rebbe brings about Tchis HaMesim. Why the Rambam doesn't bring Tchis HaMesim in Sefer Hayad? Not in Hilchos Tshuva. In Hilchos Tshuva he brings it about Kefer. But in Mashiach doesn't mention once Tchis HaMesim. Right. But in Halacha, so the Rebbe brings that the Rambam wrote in the Geras Tchis HaMesim that he only wrote in the Yad things that were halachically he knew, and that which was not for sure, he didn't write as halacha. But if someone comes and finds it that it is, it's not a problem. In other words, clearly that he wrote based on a perspective. So I asked the Rebbe that maybe he could say the same thing with the Shedim. The Rambam is speaking from so-called the Bechina of Chochmah Teira, where these things are not, which would also explain how the Beis Yosef is mevatel kaparas with chickens. Similarly dismissive term, very strong. Also like black magic, basically. And we do it with ganzen trask. And the Rambam, no, it's not just right. Exactly. I don't know. Is there any communities that follow the Beis Yosef? This Ashkenazim?
Yeah, the Svardim don't do kaparas.
Svardim don't. No. Yeah. But he says that he's shailed it. He mamish says it that it's mamish aminig. What does he say? He says like it's
a kaparas when they're buying a house and other things.
That's what he made for me.
Yeah. But not for having kippah.
We won't go into. They do other types of kaparas, but not with chickens. Huh? Anyway, the point I'm making here is that at the end of it, the Rebbe has in many places. For example, the Rambam writes in Meir Nevuchim that number.
You're right. The Rebbe didn't answer that one.
He didn't answer. I thought I wanted. I was. He didn't respond to that. I was asking, is this correct to say? Just left the first piece.
But he didn't go into details. How is it possible that there was Shedim after the Rambam?
No. He just made it like it's two different opinions. The Rambam says what he says. I mean, regardless, you have a problem even without the Rebbe. It's not the Rebbe's. The Rebbe was just saying, I'm coming to make the Mechlekes a little less bailet. Like today, we say for sure it's bottle.
Right.
So, what I wanted to say was that, what was I going to say about Midas?
So the bottom line, if somebody is asking you, is this existing today? What's the answer?
The answer is, according to all of us, it doesn't exist. Everyone said Baal Shem Tov was Mevatel. Shadim? You talking? I'm talking about we're not talking about the shadim that we call shadim, the real things. Like with the chicken feet and. But he says also, it says then that the Baal Shem Tov was Mevatel.
Yeah, it says clearly.
It says clearly. The same except for Zechrenis. It was Mevatel, that was it. You ever see a shed around lately? I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to relate to you, but okay. Exists a ruach. You're not even supposed to say the word. Shem Dalet. Dibukim, yeah.
That is happening even in this generation, last generation.
Well, Kabbalah, the dibuk you have in Hayem Yem when he speaks about the Nasi these days.
Yeah.
Because either through Ibur or through, does he say dibuk?
No.
Ibur or through Ibur or Gilgul. But dibuk is a different thing. Dibuk can be a positive thing too. That there's a dibuk of another neshama and your neshama. Yeah. No, but there's also a positive, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. The Im Yaro love Ruach Mamonim, you could have also a neshama of a tzaddik. Anyway, what I wanted to say was that the truth is when you learn. I was going to tell you the Rambam and Meir Nevuchim. A lot of Jews have a problem with Meir Nevuchim. Same thing. And then many of them don't learn the first four prakim of Hilchos Yesod Torah because it was seen as the chikira of the Rambam. In other words, they accept his halacha, but not his philosophies, which were shaped by Aristotle and was for Nevuchim. And even by Nevuchim was known. You didn't learn it because it was meant for Nevuchim, not for someone. They always say, you learn by Nevuchim, you may fall asleep after the question and never wake up for that type of thing. But nevertheless, the Rabbeim, the Alter Rebbe learned by Nevuchim, Al Pi Chassidus and Kabbalah with the Tzemach Tzedek. And the Tzemach Tzedek has Biyurim and Meir Nevuchim. Meir Nevuchim was elevated to even to Pi Chassidus and Kabbalah. L'cheir it's mamish not at all the same shit derech. But the answer is, Kol HaTorah is a Torah. Everything has its role. And even the Rambam himself writes in Hakdama to Meir Nevuchim that he makes a vow that you should not read this book unless you have. He's writing it specifically for this student. The Rebbe has sichos about this as well. How can you learn it if the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe makes up fetish, the Rambam makes up fetish Yisur. Anyway, bottom line is, the Meir Nevuchim says many things that sound apologetic almost. Like, why do we have Keteris? Keteris was meant to sweeten because of the foul odor of the karbonis. Why they're karbonis? Because those days there was a lot of shechita for Avodah Zarah, so they essentially gave the Jews something similar. He has a lot of such explanations in mitzvahs.
Because they were steeped into
and a lot of things that explain it in context that we would find almost repulsive if someone said it. How could you say that when you're karbonis, apichsidis is a ganze karban, Hashem, Isis is but just a lot of things.
It needs explanation.
I'm just saying, the Meir Nevuchim, but no, I want to just say one point. Then the Meir Nevuchim, for example, says you can't ask a question how come certain mitzvahs are in a certain number, why certain things are a kazayas or 10 or 9 or 5 or 4, because whatever number it would be, you could ask that question. That's what he says. The Rebbe brings an ha'ara in the Sikha, in a letter rather. I remember Tu B'Shvat, I think Lamed Ches. The Rebbe writes, on the other hand, you find the Chassidus. What do you mean? And every number is b'diuk. There's no such thing as it could be another number. So the Rambam's answer is a legitimate answer, so-called Al Pi Nigla. Yeah, number. That's something you have to be medaik every number because they had to choose a number. But Al Pi Primus Atera, every number is Ezgerech. They did not have to choose that number. He could have chosen a different number. So the Rebbe says, Yesh L'Tavich Al Pi Eira Atera Vayechi. I remember when the Rebbe wrote the order, I right away went to run to Eira Atera. I was working on the Sefer Lakutim. And Eira Atera says there's Primus Harotzen and Chitzenius Harotzen. In Chitzenius Harotzen of a mitzvah, the number is not that critical. Do the mitzvah, then this number, that. Primus Harotzen, however, he wants specifically this number. So the Rambam, in other words, you could explain the whole Meir Nevuchim in a certain dimension. If Torah is Pshat, the Rambam is Drusad, the Rambam was speaking for Nevuchim, that the reason for Karbonis, that's not the ultimate reason. But one reason was for those that had that issue. But is that the reason God told us to make a carbon because there was a Avodah Zarah, God forbid? Or Keteris doesn't have any value except to yeah, why does that keep moving? Huh?
Maybe there's a Shindala.
Yeah, you're kicking it.
I thought there was a Shindala. I thought there was more than
No. But Tachtel don't compare to even though we never saw his feet, his toes.
I was kicking you.
It's a good sign. It's like the Gemara. He was what was he doing? He was scratching him. Blood was going from him because learning he wasn't even noticed, right? Was the Gemara? What's it?
Like you're saying before.
By Rava, by who's it? Rava?
Observing Atzmus.
He was learning. He was scratching. He was pushing blood. He was, Yeah. Anyway, so the beauty of it all. Let's just move. The beauty of it all is that every level, literally every level, everyone speaks on that particular level, and it could be true on that level, and that's that. As long as you know there's a bigger picture, it's fine to say they don't have midas in Lamayla Metzilus. That's correct, but that's one dimension. So the point here is basically what he goes back to saying is that okay, and these b'chinas midas atzmim, meaning how they are Lamayla, is the way it's in Chochmah. And that's what it means. Maybe he's being metavech this too. In other words, the Chochmah is midas atzmim, but the midas as they come down to the lower levels, like midas of Atzilus, is maybe the way the. So in other words, one second. Well, I can't say that. Spouse, you can't say that. Now I was trying to say that according to this, if midas atzmi is in chokhmah, so that's where you have midas. The Rambam, the Chokrim, you'd say is higher. Higher than that, there's no midas. And lower than that, you could say mamish even hispilus in a way. 1 second. Okay, I don't want to go there further. Then he continues and says that this is also now the difference between Chochmah and Bina. Remember, we're speaking about Chochmah and Bina. Chochmah is called Reishis Ishtalshelus, Bina is called Moked Ishtalshelus. Moked, of course, is far closer. You say source. Reishis is like the Rosh, is like ahead of it, but it's beyond it. Moked is like a source that connected to it. So, like similar to maybe the two types of Ilaval. So, what does he say? Lower. So I'll read this inside and then we'll continue from there because we read this already, but I'll read it again. Okay, so he's established that there's midas atzmim lamayla, you cannot say, in other words, that midas don't go all the way up there. Yet at the same time, obviously, the other side of it is that Chochmah and Moichin is beyond midas. That's very clear as well. So now he says like this. The bottom of 298. The difference of Chochmah is the Reish says Talshus. Reish like a Rosh, the beginning, the head of. And Mashabinu Moked Ishtalshus, and Bina is the source of Ishtalshus, like I mentioned earlier, chapter 39. He discussed it well as well. I'll make sure, is that 39? Was I right about that? Yeah. The Mashabinu Moked Ishtalshus is Ha'ilav Olu Be'efa Gazel Liyas B'chinas Muhus Nivdal. Bina is Makar Shtalsus because the ill of all, the cause and effect of Bina's effect, a cause as an effect of, is in a way that it allows a Muhus Nivdal, something separate, of a separate personality to emerge. and what extends from the cause is not like the core, the essence of it. But a Chachma, on the other hand, it does not become a separate entity, but the energy is like the etzem, like the core. So I explained this in the last class. Let me just briefly state this. Remember, when your Chachma is the spark of an idea, you don't have any sense of fleshing it out or any details. So even to yourself, you barely really comprehend it. An idea fell into your head, let alone to someone else. When you flesh it out in Bina, then it has the ability to begin to reach someone that's nivdal, something outside of you. You can explain it to someone who may never really get the resonance of your concept, but they get the idea because you explain it to them. So Bina is the key bridge to something of outside of yourself. Chachma, on the other hand, is fundamentally internal, and if you only had Chachma alone, there would be no Mohus Nivdal, because the Eir itself is like the Etzem. It's still Eir. But here we have an example, in microcosm of Atzilus, we have the example of Eir and Keli. Chachma is like the Eir, and Bina is like the Keli. Subtly. Obviously, in general terms, Eir, Chachma and Bina are both Eir and Meichen. And Midas would be more Kelim. But you get the idea. So, you could say that if Midas is application, personal application, or practical application compared to intelligence and the concept, like we spoke earlier, that you can know the application like the halacha, and you don't know all the reasoning and arguments that led you, like you said, the hachrachis, and all the arguments that led you to this conclusion. So you could say within intelligence itself, Bina is the application compared to Chachma. The application, I don't mean application in action, I mean application that you fleshed out an idea into detail. That's what he's saying here. And this is what it says in Me'er from Rameir Papyrus, is a major Kabbalist. It's an encyclopedia of Kabbalah. The Bina is Kav Hamida. As we said, Kav Hamida, we called it a yardstick, but it's more than a yardstick, it's also a measuring stick. It's like in cooking, you use something that doesn't just measure, but it also is what regulates the flow. It's the regulator, the measurer and regulator of the flow of something. Is there a name for such an instrument that doesn't just measure, but also causes the flow to be regulated? You know what I'm saying? All in one.
The heating system is a thing called a pressure troll. It measures the pressure and adjusts the flow.
Okay, so pressure troll. You can call that. Okay, Bina is the pressure troll. I don't know if that's ever been used.
I'm not sure there are other examples.
And this is why is mashchasa. We never came to what that means. Mashchasa shenesenes mida v'gvul lezah. We didn't determine that. We just said it's some type of measurer, some type of regulator. You said it was in Truma, yeah? You said it by the Mishkan?
No, I didn't find that. I looked right.
There's fun for this. I have to find the Aramaic dictionary. I probably have one here. Rabbi Tachtal, you don't know what mashchas is?
I'm not very clear with that, so...
But no, it may be regulated, but it's probably a meaning of the word. It's probably referring to a certain measure that they had in the time of the Talmud. That's what I would suspect. Or in those times, that's how they measured things. Like today we have, what do we have? When a carpenter or any type of builder, there's ways of measuring. It's probably one of those scales, or it could even be a scale. How do you say scale in Aramaic? That other word, the tikla, was like a scale, like a weight.
The name and weight
Huh?
the kale in the nail.
Tikla, yeah.
So tikla, so that's like a tikla.
He mentioned it before, Tikla.
Yeah.
What is this adding?
It's probably because it's for those that know what mashchosa means. It's just he's using a Lashon Chazal.
London.
This is the Me'er saying it. He just simply, that's the word that it's used. Maybe it could be a word in Zohar for all I know. Maybe not in Gemara. I'm almost sure. I remember this word. I think there's different type of scales that they had. They had the scales like that. There were different type of measures. Weight was different than today. There's two type of scales. There's a scale that, like that, like mishkal. What do we call maznayim, right? And then there's a scale that just weighs it by another way it weighs. There's different ways. It's one of those tools. That measures or gives, creates, measure, and parameters to Zah. Why? Bina is this Kav Hamida, because in Chachma it's not Kav Hamida yet. You don't have anything measuring, you just have a spark of an idea. Bina is the one that weighs, measures, defines, regulates the idea. To Muhus Nivdal, to a separate personality, like the Ilav Olol of the first sort, of a separate personality. And that's why it's in a form of Kav Hamida, a yardstick that regulates, a regulator. In order, so there should be Hagabola, there should be a regulation, a channeling, I guess, a limit to the hamshach, to the transmission of the energy from level to level, to the point that in the lower levels the energy does not radiate in a revealed way. Chachma is still higher than Adayan, meaning it hasn't yet come down to that level. It will, through Bina, from Kav Hamida, from this yardstick, this measuring regulator, of Seder Shtalshus Elmas, of the orderly progression, the hierarchy of the worlds. And from the perspective of Chachma, the air is Nimshach, transmits in all the levels in a revealed way. And this is what Chachma is, the primary force of Atzilus. As we've learned, Chachma b'Abba mekanano b'Atzilus. Abba is nested in Atzilus. Bina mekanano b'Kursaya. Bina is nested in Bria. Zah mekanano b'Yitzira. Zah is nested in Yitzira, and Malchus is nested mekanano b'Asiya. So it's all macrocosm, microcosm. Within Atzilus you have Yud Kei Vav Kei, but what's the dominant Atzilus of Atzilus is the Yud, the Chachma. So in that context, all of Atzilus is like Chachma compared to Bria. U'Kanoida, like he says here, the Bina b'chinas Bria shabatzilus, v'Chachma b'chinas Atzilus shabatzilus. Bina is Bria of Atzilus. It's already Bria. Why Bria? Because it's no longer just a spark, a point. It's already transmitting to something outside of it. It's creating something that can reach an outer, another. And Chachma is Atzilus shabatzilus. Shamsab b'chinas HaChachma meir eira agili b'chol ha'madregas d'Atzilus. Mitzad Chachma, the light, the energy radiates in all the levels of Atzilus. Ad gam b'chinas HaMalchus, all the way to even to the level of Malchus, the lowest level. Meir eira gam b'hisfiris ha'chrein shabamalchus. The light, the energy radiates even in the lower 5 spheres of Malchus that we learned earlier by the full moon. That when there's no full moon, only the higher 5 spheres of Atzilus are illuminated. The full moon is the whole moon. The whole Malchus is radiating. So from when Chachma dominates, the entire moon is full, which means the entire Malchus is full. I know you can ask me the question about the astronomical question about the moon. We discussed that at length back then. This is according to the opinion that the moon is stationary and does not turn. Does not turn. So it's based on other factors why there's a full or diminished moon. B'zehu the Dalet Shemes Apsag Ma'aban. You're familiar with the Miluim? We discussed this once at length, but I'll just summarize. You know what a Milui is, right? A Milui is when a word is written out in its full, what do we call it, permutation? How would you say it in English? Let's say the word Baruch. So Beis Reish Vav Chaf. When you say Baruch, you only hear Chaf. But you spell out Baruch, it's Beis Reish Vav Chaf. So Beis, the Milui of Beis is Beis Yud Tzaf. The letter, it's all included in one letter Beis. So there are times when there are permutations of the letters, we refer to the Miluim. The Milui, as the Alter Rebbe says, is a maimer from the Alter Rebbe called L'Hovin In HaMiluim. He says that the letter the obvious is the revealed energy, and a milui is concealed energy. Now, in miluyim, the main milui, of course, is around the name Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So Havaya is Gematria 26. Yud, Hey, and Vav. So it's Yud and 5, 15, 21, and 26. Right? Okay. I'm checking with Abal Cheshbenus. Okay. Now, that's when Yud Kei Vav Kei is just Havaya. But what happens, the Miluim, there's 4 different type of Miluim of Havaya. So it's just to complicate matters. We call Milui Alfin, Milui Hayin, and Milui Yud. Now, the Yud is always written the same way. You can't write a Yud 2 ways. Yud Vav Dalet. But how about Hey? Hey could be Hey Aleph. It could be Hey. It could be Hey Yud. Vav 2 could be Vav Aleph Yud, Vav Vav, or Vav Yud Vav. So that's where that turns into 4 different manifestations of Shem Havaya with the Milui. The lowest one is Ma, Gematria Adam. That's usually Atzilus. That's 45. How does it work? So we did this once. So Yud is always 20. So that we always keep 20. 20 is good. The distinctions are the Hey, Vav, Hey. So Milui Alphin. So Hey would be 6. Hey Aleph. The second Hey is 6, is 12. So 12 and 20, 32. And the Vav is with the Aleph, also Aleph. Vav, Aleph, Vav is 13. So we have 45. Got it? Good. That's Milui Alpha. If you do Milui Hayin, so then you're going to get now the next number is Ban 52. So we have 20. Hey now is Hey. That's 10 each. So we have 20, 30, 40. And Vav without, now there's no Hey in a Vav. So there's Vav, it's just Vav. So it's 12, so 52. Good? So far so good? Then Milui...
the fourth one, we can take on faith, the rest of it. You did good the first 2.
Okay. Now I just want to say it for the record, just
Wait, but there's only 3 letters that you're playing with here.
Right, yeah. You only play with Hey, Vav.
How do you get to Am?
Yeah, you can get there, try it out. I'll say it already. I might as well say it for the record. But let's now do Yudin, but the Yudin is 2 ways to do it. So here we go. So we have 20 again, Yud. Now we have Vav Yud Vav. So that's Vav Yud Vav. There we go. 10 and 12. That's 22 and 22. 44 and 40. And 22 and 20. I'm sorry. 62. What?
22 twice, right?
44.
44.
Yeah.
44 plus a 20 is
64.
And now the Vav.
No, what's that? I skipped Sag, 63.
Yeah, we took Sag for granted.
Sag works like this. Sag is a combination of Hey, I think Hey and Aleph, if I recall correctly. Sag would be 20, Vav Aleph Vav. That's what we said. 12.
Vav Aleph Vav is 13.
In other words, you have 30 from the 2 Hays.
Vav Aleph. I'm sorry. 13 and 13, 26 and 20, 46, and then we have the. What did I?
No.
20
from the 30 from each, from both Hays, and then you have 13 from the Vav.
There we go. Right, exactly. Yeah. That's it. You have 20. You have from each Hay. You have 20. 15, that's 30 plus 20 is 50. Okay. And the Vav, Aleph Vav, is 1363. So there you have Aleph. For the Vav it's an Aleph, and the Hays are with a Yud. And Ab, everything is with Yuds. And then it works. 20 for Yud. A Hay is 15. Hay is 15, so we have 30 and 50. And Vav, Yud, Vav. Right? Would be what? 50, 60, 72. Ayin Beis. Okay? Now, that's all numbers. What it really comes down to, that there's 4 different expressions of Shem Havaya. And usually, just to give you, where is it used mostly? So you often hear Ma'aban, Yichud Ma'aban. Even in Manishtana, we're going to say, it says, Kan haben shoyel, ban shoyel ma. That's what's brought in Sfarim. Ban shoyel ma. Ban is Gematria Behema, ma is Gematria Adam. So ban and ma usually refer to the Yichud of Nefesh HaBamis, Nefesh HaLekis, worldly things, divine things. Sometimes Yichud Ma'aban is marriage, Zachar Nekeva. You determine who the behemoth is. It's the man. But it's not behemoth, obviously, because you're basically talking about Gvura and Chesed. And then Ab and Sag are usually referred to in the world, like Sag relates to the world of Toyu a lot, and Ab, it refers to Ak usually. It's the highest world. Shem Ma Chodesh. It's the highest dimension. But they're all divine permutations. So he says like this. What does he say?
Ma is symbolized in Chesed, no?
Sometimes. Ma is usually Atzilus. It's usually Bittel. Chochmah is Ma.
But Ban is low, is more.
Ban has a higher root. It's like Rav Tfuz, B'Kayach Shar.
But the way it comes down, it's lower.
So whatever comes down lower it has a higher root. That's why it's 52, not 45.
And what is Sag exactly?
I didn't go into detail. I mentioned Toihu. If you want to have sources, I'll give you, and you can look them up if you like. There's my mother on this. Huh?
There's 1-2 times gas in the
Yeah.
The water.
He brings it to Melech Gayas Lovash.
And what
Okay.
is Av?
Av is the highest, is the Shem Ma'achodesh usually. A maskil Eson Lezrachi. Eson is usually Shem Ab. Eson Sheben Nisham. It's not really relevant. I just wanted to say it for the record. Hine Shem Ab ho b'mili Yudin. So Shem Ab is the Mili Yudin. It means how the Havaya, all the letters are the Mili Yudin, meaning that the Milis are Yud. The B'chol Oisma Adal Esi Shesh Yud. Then all 4 letters is a Yud. The Yud has a Yud, of course. The Yud Vav Daled. The He has a Yud. The Vav has a Yud, and the He has a Yud. Or b'Shem B'Shag Shehu B'Bina. So Ab here clearly is Chachma. Ha'es Yud Kehem B'Mili Yud, va'es Vav B'Mili Aleph. Actually, he spells it out here, what I just said. Bina. Yud K is B'Mili Yud. Right? Is Yud, is the but Eis Vav is B'Mili Aleph. So the Yud and the Hey, the 3 letters have a Yud, and 1 letter has an Aleph, the Vav. The Eis Aleph who beis Yud and v'kav be'emtza.
It still does have a Yud.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. The Eis Aleph who beis Yud and v'kav be'emtza. But it's not as obvious as in the first one. The Yud shalamaylo b'chinas ha'chochmah. In the Aleph, the Yud above is the level of Chochmah. Va'yud shalamata mahapich ponov shezem meir alat tzimtzum v'hu sha'er ein meir b'gili. The Yud lamata, if you look at the Yud lamata, it's upside down. It's like, here Yud goes like this.
Facing inward.
Right, it's facing inward. Mahapich panov means its face is, it's turned inward. Its face is turned inward. The above, the top Aleph, look at the Siddur, is a outward, yeah. It's also inward, no?
It's facing outward to the next place.
It's faced backwards like it is in the printer.
Let me see.
It's right here. Look at that.
It's more accurate
Look at
than
any other
in the Sefer Torah, where
The top one is facing one way, and the bottom one is facing another way.
Yeah, I got it. Inward. That's facing outward. Okay, out. It's also facing the thing, but it's facing upward.
Even in Ayin Beis, we can go back to this.
Yeah, you're right. It's facing the next letters. Yeah. Okay. That's the way it's supposed to be written. The Shafras, right? Okay, yeah. If you write the opposite, it's puzzle, right? So what's the relevance? So he says, so therefore the lower Aleph, the lower Yud rather, the lower Yud is in the form of Tzimtzum. In other words, if it's facing inward, facing Mahapach Panav, its face is facing inward into itself, it's more of a concealed state. 1 second.
It's not a giving.
So what do we know from this? That Chachma and Bina. Chachma, it's mamish revealed. The Yud is everywhere. In Bina, the Yud is in 3 letters, and the 4th letter of the Yud is somewhat betzimtzum, because even the lower Yud in the Aleph is faced inward. But there's still Gilead, there's still the Yud. V'zeu shagam Bina nema v'nor yetze.
He's not calling here that Sag is Toyu. He's not talking about this.
No. V'zeu shagam b'bina nema v'nor yetze. That's why also by Bina it says v'nor yetze me'eden. The river, it's like a river extending outward, but it's coming from where? Yetze. That means Nod has 2 opposites. On one hand, it's revealing; it's a river that's extending. On the other hand, it's no longer in the Pnim. It's Yetze. It's already going to the Nifrit. It's going like Misham Yiparid will become It'll separate into 4. Ubavav she'uinyan hamidas. Now comes the third level, which is the milui vavin. I'm sorry, milui. Vav is the midas. Eru b'chinas tzimtzum.
No, I think
No. The vav of aleph. Yeah. He's still talking about the vav of aleph. But it doesn't really. No. I don't think so. Okay, 1 second.
No.
Yeah, the vav is definitely shem ban.
Yeah, what's in Vahavav?
No, but it's both.
no. The vav is the vav aleph vav. It's talking about the aleph. It's having the yotchel.
I know. 1 second. But the vav is also letter vav. 1 second. No, there's 2 things here.
The 2 yuds, right?
No, it works like this. Chachma is yud. Therefore, in the Shem Ab, it's mili yud, and everything is a yud. That's clear? So in Yud Kei Vav Kei itself, it's Yud. He's talking here now, not Miluyim, he's talking now both things at once. That's what's going on here. So the Yud is Chachma, and also the Milui. You have Yud in each letter. Yud, Hey, Vav, Yud. Good? Yud Kei Vav, everything Yud. In Bina, you have also Yud, but the primary force in Bina is the Hey. So in Bina you have a Yud in the Yud, you have a Yud in the Hey, you have a Yud in the second Hey, but in the Vav, you have an aleph, not a yud. Right? That's what he said.
So this vav,
Hold on.
Also really yud.
Yeah, no, but there's a yud there, but the yud is concealed. That's what he's saying.
There's 2 yuds. One is not concealed, one is.
Yeah. But there's one that is. In Chachma, it's not at all.
Yeah.
Good. In Vav, he's referring now the Vav, not of the aleph. Maybe it's also referring to the aleph. But Vav is the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Vav, Midas Ha'eru B'chinas Simtzum. V'al Kei Nasim HaMidas B'chinas HaBina B'chinas Mahus Nivdal. And that's why the Midas become from Bina, they become a separate entity. As we spoke before, they become a separate entity. Because in the form of, because it's a B'chinas Simtzum. You could say it's both. Because the Vav of it's both. The vav of Bina has an aleph in it. The aleph, the lower yud in aleph is faced inward, which is tzimtzum. So that Bina is allowing, as opposed to chachma, for the vav to emerge in midas. That's what he's saying.
I think you have to say that it's part of sag, because he said sag shahud b'bina.
No, he has to say he has to say it's ban. He doesn't spell it specifically, but look at the next one. You'll see right away. V'shemau begili memili alfin. Oh, 1 second. He does say it. I'm sorry. V'shem ma b'mili alfin. Shem ma is mili alfin. V'shem ba b'mili heyin. The hey achrenu b'chinas malchus. So shem ma is b'mili alfin. V'shem ba b'mili. So v'shem ma is b'mili alfin. V'shem ba b'mili heyin. V'hey achrenu b'chinas malchus. Okay, but here the thing is like this. It would seem to say that it would make sense that the midas are shem ban and malchus is shem ma. But it's not saying that specifically. He's saying now shem ma mili alfin, v'shem ba mili heyin, v'hey achrenu b'chinas malchus. Hold on. It almost sounds like that malchus is both ma and ban here. That's what it almost looks like. Which would be a little weird. One second. Because Shem Baba Milia Hey, and he says, and Hey Achrein is B'chinas Malchus. So the last level, what is Ma? How we say Ma is Yud. Then you have Hey, right? Hey.
No, Ma is Hey Aleph.
I'm saying Hey Aleph rather. Hey Aleph. Shem Baba Milia Hey. I'm sorry, but yeah, my mistake. Shem Ban is B'Milia Hey. Hey, and Vav. And he says that's the Hey Achrenu of B'chinas Malchus. So Malchus is Ban. What's Ma? It's not clear here. So basically it says what? Ab is Chachma, Sag is Bina, Midas is Ma, and Malchus is Ban. You're probably right. It usually is so. It does reverse there. Zocher and Nekeva, yeah. So Ma is the Midas. That's Mili Alfin. Bottom line is like this. I mean, he's not spelling it out, but I think it works like this. Remember, we said in the Bina, here's how it works. I think this is how it works. In Bina, the key distinction between Bina and Chachma is what is in the Vav, right? Instead of a Yud, it's an Aleph. So Aleph also have Yuds, but there's one Yud that's inward. So that allows Bina now to already relate, fleshing out the idea. It's now relating to another level. because it's concealed. That lower yud is what shifts it. 1 second. That in turn will become the vav of midas. And midas is what? Midas is shema. So midas has, what's shema? Milui alfin. So the aleph of the vav of bina becomes the aleph in the hey aleph, and vav aleph vav of midas, of ma, which is midas. And then in ban, the primary focus is on the hey. It's milui hayin, so that's why there's the last hey, which is malchus. Did everyone get that? Did anyone get it? We can make a chart. But bottom line explanation of all of it is that that bina is a step beneath chachma. Chachma is pure yud, and bina is already beginning to draw down, and that's why both the letter bina is hey, and which is like expansion of the yud, and also the milui of bina is an aleph instead of a yud, with a reverse, an inverted yud, which allows for the midas to merge, which are going to be complete aleph, or generally a vav. So I think the vav is referring both to the vav of midas of yud ke vav ke, and also the vav of the bina vav. That's what I think he's saying. Wow.
What is the vav of the bina? Talking about the vav in the Shem Sag, that you have vav, aleph, vav.
But that's a bina. That's bina.
That's Gevurah. He doesn't use Gevurah, but it's its own.
Yeah. Aval b'shem ab gam behei achreinu hu mili yud. But in shem ab, which was chachma, even the hei achreinu is also mili yud. So in malchus in ban, you see it revealed the hay, because the hay is hey. But in ab, the hey achrein is hey yud. So it's also it's mili is yud. He's explaining al pi Kabbalah what he said in the beginning, that from chachma even malchus would be a full moon, would be a yud, basically the whole gili of the yud. Whereas in malchus on its own, it's only a hay. That's also half. That's good. Hey Svidus Akrenus. Or the 10 Svidus. That would be Yud again. Cholas Svidus. Cholas 10 Svidus. And that's all this is because the Eire, Chochmah, is similar to the source. So Chochmah has this intensity. The paradox is, remember, Chochmah is not in a revealed, fleshed out way. It's just a powerful intensity. That's what it is. It's not broken down and actually reaching. It's just that when Chachma radiates, it would be like a Gili Momaila that would just encompass everything. So it's more like a flash of power, not an integrated power.
Is Chachma?
Yeah. I'll go back to the first line and you'll see. Now he's going to go back to the discussion that began chapters ago. Going back literally to this discussion. This is going back literally almost to chapter 134, 20 chapters. You can literally consider this a new section now. This was the transmission of the Av. This was what the Av is transmitted or draw down. Shemshichu b'chinas Yisrael Sabot Funa. They drew down Yisrael Sabot Funa, as we learned, which is the lower Chachma and Bina. Va'ike b'chinas Midas Sheba Chachma. The prime is Midas within Chachma. Even though we learned before chapter 137, Yisrael Sabot Funa b'chlal b'chinas Bina. Yisrael Sabbatun in general is the level of Bina, because it's only Ha'ara, lo yamshach atzmis, not the core transmission of Nevertheless, it's true, it's a lower level within Meicha, but it's still the domain of Meicha, not the domain of Midas. And especially from the Midas of Chachma, the inclinations within Chachma, from there transmits as Gili Eir. And And this is what it says. I appeared to Avram with the name Kel Shaddai. And we learned before chapter 142 that the Ovis drew down from the source of Ishtalshus higher than the Kavamida, higher than the regulator. Because the regulator regulates step by step, and the Ovis, they had to draw down more in order to repair and realign the world. Which means their Amshacha was from the level of Chachma that is Reishis Ishtalshus, that is the root, the head of Ishtalshus, not, we said Makar Ishtalshus. So the Ovis brought down from Chachma, not from Bina. From Midah Sheba Chachma, however. Not core intelligence. So it's still Abba ve'ima Tatan. Because now the transmission that comes from Bina, the source of Ishtalshus, is according to the regulating flow. It's not a higher entity. It's already the beginning of the flow within existence. Which means that the general Eir is not like the Etzem. Remember, we spoke the Eir HaGvul is not like the Etzem. The Eir HaGvul is already measured according to the structure of existence. Eir HaBligvul is measured according to the source. It's just expressing the source. So, b'microcosm, Chochmah is like Eir HaBligvul, and Bina is like Eir HaGvul. And the method of its transmission of Bina comes in a Midah, measured v'gvul parameters, al pi maimer kava Midah, b'seder ishtalshus eilmus. According to this regulating yardstick, in the cosmic order of the structure of the gradation of the worlds, shebibchinas malchus ein amer ki le'er. That on this level, b'chinas malchus does not have air in it. Hu b'chinas chasar ne'er. There's chasar ne'er. Remember, we spoke at length that from the level of Bina, that's where came the Chet Eitzadas. Because there's a possible diminishing. Remember the whole chapter on Chasad? Time Machsede? I think it's.
Hey, just kept on using the word every
Right. To show that there's a diminished state. The Meshum Zayachal is Nikas Achetzenim. So from Bina alone, there could still be a Nikas Achetzenim. That's why there can be a weaning of the outliers. Right? Outliers. The outers. The unwanted elements. Outsiders, of the outsiders. There can be a weaning of the outsiders. A suckling of the outsiders. You're right. Not weaning. Gleaning, I meant. Yeah, nursing. Nursing. The nursing of the outsiders.
Uniqueness of raw.
Yeah. And through this can become the great, a very deep concealment and covering. Like we learned earlier, we're Sham, like you just said, Pedekuf Mem Gimel. Like it says in the bottom, chapter 143. So this goes back all the way to 142, 143. So you really want to get it, you got to go back to that whole discussion. Let me just look a second. My own.
Only 10 chapters ago. Only 10 chapters ago.
But it was heavy chapters. Yeah. The whole Tzimtzum, the whole Chson. That's the chapter with Chson. Yeah, they filled in the Chson. Daim Chseirei. Yeah, Malchus, Yabosha, Yaakov Umayim. That whole chapter. Yeah. Ato, Choser, Miut HaYerech, Chivya. Yeah, Chulshan Shmosa. Yeah. Very good. Wow. He's tying it all together. Good. So there could be a chsaron from Bina alone, which is what happened with Chet Eitzadas. Avala Ovis, so what did the Ovis do? They plugged the leak. They stopped the suckling, the carnage, the suckling of the outsiders, of the outlaws, of the nicht gewünschene Elementen, ungewünschene Elementen, the parasites and the leeches. Like the Zalman Gerari used to say, when someone would call him at night, he says, at night only the mazikim come at night. The mazikim, they're like the what do they call the destroyers? The destroyers.
No?
But Ovis, through their work, they drew down from Chachma Reishis, the head of Ishtashlos. From there, the transmission is not according to the Kavamid. It's still not Eira Bligvul Mamish. It's still Midrash Shebemechem with all this. Remember that. But it's higher than the regulation. In other words, when you have, for example, think of it this way. Let's say your regular pipes are flowing into your home. They're bringing water. But because they're regular, they're not reinforced or anything. They're prone. Bacteria enters. Rust starts entering. What's the only way to correct that? You have to bring from something that's more than the original source. You have to have a surge of water from a completely new pure source that's more than just the regular flow.
Wash it all out.
To wash it all out and bring in and correct it and repair it. It's like healing has to come from a place that's deeper than the place where the illness began. Here too, to fill the chesaron has to come from higher than the regular flow. So you have to have an additional flow. That's Shem Shadeh, as he's saying. So they drew down from a place that's not according to this measure, and the revelation drew down in all the levels, also in the 5 lower spheres of Malchus. Yud, not just the Hey, not just Bina. And this additional extra surge causes that there should not be able to be a suckling of the outsiders from the level of Malchus. The lower 5 spheres, like the moon.
From that side down?
Yeah. With Tefer is down. Tefer is Netzach, how do you say it? Tefer is down. As we shall explain. And they also affected through this that the divine revelation should also be below. Which means that the Ovis drew down the level of Atzilus. That's the state of Chochmah. Like we said before, Chochmah is the primary force of Atzilus, which means they drew down Atzilus, which draws down and radiates energy in all the levels of Atzilus. And this drew down Nimshach and just transmitted also the revelation also below through the Malchus of Atzilus. This is the difference between the covenant of Noach, because Hashem also made a covenant with Noach that he'll never destroy the world, and a covenant he made with Avram. What's the difference? The Krisis Bris the Noach and B'chinas Yichud Chitzeni Dava. Oh boy. The Christness of Noach was Yichud Chitzeni, the outer unification of Abba Ve'ima Chacham Bina, which is necessary for the preservation of existence, as we said, Kima, maintenance. Christness of Avram, and the Chavim with Avram, Avur B'Makam Acher, elsewhere it explains, this is the inner unification of Abba Ve'ima, which is elsewhere explained. Here, it's not consistent with what it says here, like he's going to qualify in a moment. But according to what we explain here, also the Ovis is Yichud Chitzeni. So elsewhere, the difference is explained very simple. Noach, layers base, we created that the maintenance of the world should continue. What did Avram achieve? He achieved that inner unification. But according to what's explained here, that also Avram brought from the outer. So Imkain, so that's then the difference. So then what's the difference between Noach and Avram according to the explanation in this Maimer? The Christus B'Yud that the covenant with Noach was on the preservation, the sustenance of existence of the world. The beginning there was the Mabul, the flood that destroyed the world. It was the destruction of the world. And the covenant with Noach is that there should be sustaining of the world. This Amshacha comes from Bina, B'chinas Bris, Bria Datzilis rather. Is the level of Bria Datzilis. It's Bria, these B'chinas Ha'elmas K'mashen Al Pimayim V'Kavamida. That the world should be at least, it's not like I said before, new water rushing into the pipes. It just bring it back. It should be not rusty anymore. It should be like it was before the destruction. That the world should continue to have their energy. God stopped the mazalas, right? During that year, the world suspended itself. Moshe said, I will not destroy anymore. and now it continues to flow. However, the covenant with Avram that there should be revealed elikus. That's not just there should be a sustenance of existence. This is that means the transmission of Atzilus within Atzilus. This transmission is higher than the Kavamida. That the energy should go also into Malchus and also down below. And this was the covenant with Avram, should be divine revelation in the worlds. So in other words, the explanation according to this Maimer is like this. It's also Yichud Chitzeni. But the Yichud Chitzeni of Bina, that's Noach. And Yichud Chitzeni of Chochmah, that's Avram. So according to also other places, Yichud Chitzeni is Noach and Yichud Pnini is by Avram. Here it's both Yichud Chitzeni, but one is from Chochmah and one is from Bina. I think we should stop here, even though it's the end of the Maimer. I'm going to stop here. Okay, we'll stop here. 1 second. We finished, almost the end of the Maimer Discourse 38. We went through chapter 152, and we have to still only conclude the Maimer. We'll do that next time. So we did pages 298, 299, all the way to the top of 300.